So this is Jay Fraga, and Jay started racing BMX bicycles as a 10-year-old in 1982, beginning a 30-year-long journey that progressed from individual racing accolades to the ownership of a business within the sport. This culminated in coaching of racers of all ages and proficiencies from novices to national champions. A crash during a race in 2010 left Jay with grappling with the new reality that of being medically retired from the sport he loved, along with the diagnosis of post-concussion syndrome. The challenges living day to day with post-concussion symptoms inspired Mr. Fraga to get involved with concussion education so that others might avoid a similar outcome. He lives with his wife and 2 children in Belchertown. And I'd just like to add, when we started talking about doing this seminar, and we were kind of beating around ideas, and we thought, let's get someone in who's gone through this so that they can give you, educate you about, from a perspective of someone who's gone through it, but it also could say it in a way that is going to be insightful and articulate. Dr. Martinez and I both looked at each other and went, Jay Fraga, and Jay was kind enough to accept our invitation to come and talk with you today. So, Jay, take it away.
Yes, sir. I'm excited to see the nurse turn out tonight. I'm even more excited to see the coaches that are here tonight, though, because you guys are really on the front lines of what I consider to be a war. To me, you're as important as a medic in an infantry unit, because you guys are the first line of defense for kids that are out there getting dinged and who might not be able to be diagnosed. So I appreciate you guys being here. So first off, a couple of additions. First, I bombed horribly my only collegiate public speaking class, so fingers crossed on this deal. Next, I really wanted to start tonight by staring at all of you and asking who you were and why you were on my lawn, but we're not going to do that. A little bit of injury humor. So I guess I'm going to tell you my story tonight, and it's important to me that my words are taken in the right context. As I'm speaking, imagine if it were your son or daughter or one of your players who were going through these things. Imagine them trying to function in school. I'm not up here as some dude with a sad story to tell. This is really, for me, about education, and it's the only reason that I'm speaking out. So I guess I'll start off with the truth. My words tonight are brought to you from experience, from someone who never gave concussions the respect that they deserve. I've paid dearly for that mistake. My words are also brought to you by the maximum dose of a Parkinson's medication that helps me to remember words that I've known all my life, but often can't remember in the words, in the middle of sentences when I'm speaking. If we're telling the truth, I'm nervous to be up here. I'm happy, though, to put a face on the damage that concussions can do, and I feel obligated to be here. This is my fight, and I don't want it to be your fight or the fight of one of your kids. And I feel like a little bit of education on this subject can go a long way towards minimizing potential damage. I'm a former BMX racer, as Dr. Merowitz said, a lifelong athlete and competitor. By competitor, I mean I'm a hard charger. I don't like to give up. I don't like to lose. And, so I'm a business owner as well. I'm a coach, a husband, a father. I've had 9 concussions that we know about. And I was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome about 1.5 years ago. That was about 6 months after my last, and hopefully final concussion. Concussions profoundly affected the quality of my life, and it's affected the lives of a number of amateur and professional athletes, young and old alike. It doesn't stop there. It impacts the families of those who suffer from it, families who in some cases can't understand where the person that they once knew so well is gone. Concussion's invisible. It's insidious, and despite getting some serious press lately, it's still widely misunderstood by the public at large. I got my first concussion as a result of a bad car accident the month before my 20th birthday. And I can't tell you a whole lot about that one because I broke both my legs. I was laid up in the hospital undergoing surgery. And as is the case most of the time, even these days, the rest of my injuries, the visible ones, took precedent, and the doctors really didn't sweat the concussion. There was a lot going on, and I was lucky to be alive. Spent some time in a wheelchair. I had to learn how to walk again, and I spent the majority of my 20s hobbling around and eventually trying to get strong enough to ride and race bikes again. I had raced bikes throughout my childhood, and I missed it immensely. The lack of a competitive outlet drove me insane. I rolled back out on the track again at 29 years old. And the feeling after being away for so long was indescribable. I told myself that I was just out there to have fun, but soon my competitive streak took over. I trained hard, and I knew that I'd never be as fast as I was before I broke my legs, but I was having fun and I was happy. I sent my orthopedic surgeon, Baystate's Paul Kerner, a note thanking him after I won my first Massachusetts state championship. I told him, "This one's for you, thanks for rebuilding me." Crashes, hard crashes, came with the territory in BMX. You'd have the wind knocked out of you, you'd break bones occasionally, and the bruises were plenty. Every now and then you'd hit your head and you'd get your bell rung, or at least I would. One of my earliest memories of a concussion was a crash that I had at a race in Westfield when I was 30. I lost it over a large jump, and it was pretty clear that it wasn't going to end well. As gravity unfolded and the ground rushed up at me, I remember thinking that this was not going to be real awesome. My next memory was sort of waking up and an EMT staring at me through the goggle opening of my helmet. And she told me to lay back down as I tried to get up. I kept trying to get up, and she finally said, "I'll let you up if you can tell me what year it is." I smirked, and I thought to myself, you know, this lady's unreal. She doesn't think I know what year it is. And so there was a pause, and she said, "Well," and I thought about it for a second, and then I thought to myself, damn it, I don't know what year it is. So clearly psychic and able to read my mind, the EMT growled, "Now lay back down," and I complied at that point. For most of my concussions, recovery consisted of feeling awful for a few days, sleeping it off, and then bouncing back after a week or so. I always made the decision unilaterally to return to action without consulting medical professionals. And like a lot of other guys, I just didn't think too much about potential consequences. I treated concussions the same way I treated a broken bone. I'd suck it up, heal up, and then come back ready to rip. I didn't know any better. And in retrospect, I was making the bed that I'm lying in today. The pattern of being injured and healing changed in May of 2010. I went off the back of my bike charging hard in a race, and actually I have a buddy of mine that was in that race here tonight. He's a Springfield fire lieutenant, and he saw me go down, and he helped me while I was out there. But anyway, it came down off the back of my bike and just absolutely slammed the back of my head off the peak of a jump. My head was the first thing to hit, and I destroyed an expensive full-face helmet in a split second. Thank God for the helmet, but it was lights out. And when I came to, I could tell right away that I had a broken rib. I could feel that much. I also had the usual assortment of first responders, Rick included, around me. But I had no idea what had happened, where I was on the track that I knew like the back of my hand. The back of my left eye was burning, and I felt absolutely inebriated. I was slurring my words. Must ask what happened 20 times over the next 10 minutes, and nothing was sinking in. And I was in trouble. I was taken to the ER, had a CAT scan, and it was interesting that Dr. Greenbacker said that, you know, in the ER they're not there to really diagnose concussion, and that was true. I didn't know who I was, and these guys sent me out of there an hour after a CAT scan because there was no bleed. I had a vague sheet of paper that mentioned concussion, and that was it. I went home. Mentioned maybe a follow-up with a primary care physician, but that was about it. I spent most of the next 2 weeks with a crushing headache and nausea that would drop an ox. When I wasn't throwing up, I was suffering through work or sleeping. In the back of my mind, I knew that was it for racing. But at that point, I really didn't care. I just wanted to feel human again. And slowly, I began to regain my faculties over the next few months. That came to a crashing halt pretty bizarrely when I was helping my young son get out of his snow boots on a Friday morning at daycare. He was sort of hovering over me, and as I stood up, we bumped heads, and it was a really light bump, and the room just went black on me. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I recovered, I looked at him, and he was absolutely unfazed. I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "Yep," and it convinced me right away that he was fine. I wasn't, I knew that. I told his teachers what had happened, keep an eye on him, and I staggered out the door bound for work with that familiar electrical headache feeling accompanying me. I don't know how many of you out here have had concussions, but you sort of have that little, feels like you're grabbing an electric fence sensation in your head. But still, I refused to accept over the course of the day that I could have a concussion. It wasn't possible, certainly not from lightly bumping heads with a 3-year-old. Come on. The next morning I woke up and I felt awful, and a splitting headache. And my wife, who at this point was not especially sympathetic to a guy who insisted on repeatedly abusing his body, asked me to go to the grocery store and pick up a few things. A random encounter where a guy pushed his cart past me to block an aisle, it left me fuming. I didn't say anything to him, but I wanted to tear this guy apart. I was angrier than I'd ever been in my life. The rage that I felt was unbelievable, and it was over something that really wasn't a big deal. I knew something was really wrong, and I actually left my cart in the middle of the aisle with everything in it, and I bailed. I made it out to the parking lot, and I called my wife, and I said, something's wrong with me. She made an appointment with Dr. Martinez, who couldn't be here tonight, but for the following Monday, and he confirmed that I'd suffered another serious concussion, and I was incredulous. He shrugged, and he just said, it doesn't take much at this point. The usual pattern of things getting better within a few weeks didn't happen. My headaches were severe and constant. The nausea didn't go away. My moods were up and down. I began to catch myself snapping at my wife and kids for things that I never would have in the past. I couldn't deal with bright light. I began to wear sunglasses inside my office to deal with the lights, because staying home and lying in a dark room, it wasn't an option for the type of person that I believed myself to be. I was a fighter, I was a survivor, and I was dependable. Yet staying home and lying in a dark room wasn't in the cards. Then I began to get depressed, and I'd always been a positive, happy person, and the sadness was pervasive. I couldn't focus, I couldn't remember anything, I'd forget words mid-conversation. I'd live for days on end in a fog, confused, and it would not go away. I did my best to hide all these symptoms because of the potential consequences of being found out. I had a family to provide for, a wife and 2 kids. I needed to keep working with no perceived drop in my performance. The increased effort towards concentrating on even basic tasks left me physically and mentally exhausted at the end of the day. I joked that the Manhattan Project had nothing on the amount of brain power that I'd expend just to function through the course of a normal day. To give you a basic idea of what this feels like, think back and recall the worst hangover you've ever had. Anybody ever had a hangover in here? No? Right. Right. Fair enough. Indulge me for a moment. Think back to it. What happens? You stay in bed for the day, try to sleep, maybe you swear off alcohol forever, pray for the day to end so you can get some relief. Now imagine feeling like that and having to snap out of bed first thing in the morning. Go out, function normally through one of your typical days. Work, kids, errands, all of that. Try to do it with a poker face, like nothing's wrong. And then realize that sleep at the end of that day isn't going to bring you any remedy. You're going to wake up tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that with the same horrendous hangover. And you own it. Imagine that. Last fall I woke up one morning feeling rougher than usual. I dropped my kids off at school and started to head for the office. On the way I had to pull over to throw up. The nausea was intense, and it had been for 6 straight months. When I got to the office, I turned my computer on, and I felt absolutely miserable. My head pounded. The light from the monitor, actually, it seared my eyes. I remember thinking, how am I going to get through the next 7 minutes of a day like this, let alone the rest of my life? I mean, it was absolute physical agony. And at that moment, I could understand how some of the athletes I'd heard about in the news who were bigger, faster, and stronger than I was had chosen to take their lives when they were facing symptoms like these. And that means exactly what it sounds like it means. It's hard to admit. I closed my eyes and I called my doctor for an appointment. Slowly I'm making progress. Mercifully, the nausea isn't constant anymore. My memory is still a serious work in progress. And confusion is still a problem. And sometimes I'll run into good friends in public, people that I've known and seen regularly for years. And it'll take more than a few seconds face to face before I'll be able to make the connection that I know them. It's certainly long enough where they'll look at me strangely and they'll ask if I'm feeling all right. And I'll nod and I'll smile. And then I'll just kind of wince and say, oh man, you realize the enormity of what just happened. I didn't recognize somebody that I've known for 20 years. A quick note about Drs. Martinez and Dr. Merowitz from the Baystate Sports Concussion Clinic. I can't say enough about these guys and the quality of care from them. I don't think that I could walk out of any other place feeling as optimistic about the future, while in the shadow of something so dark and uncertain. And there really aren't many parts of the country, and there are even less in the rest of the world, where there are doctors who understand and are as knowledgeable as these guys are about concussion. We really would do well to listen to them and their warnings for our kids' sake. And I think they're underutilized. I think that we should lean on them as much as possible. As parents, coaches, and adults, our paramount duty is to protect our kids. And that means knowing the signs when somebody's been injured, taking them out of play, and making sure that they're properly evaluated, treated, and then cleared by competent physicians. It's not something we can afford to wing. I remarked to Dr. Martinez once that after having sustained 9 concussions, I guess I've earned this. And his response was, we see people with your symptoms who've had only 1. And it really isn't how you manage recovery afterwards that makes all the difference in the world. So just 1. Concussions are probably always going to happen to an extent, but there can never be enough attention given to making sure that someone heals properly from 1. So learn the signs, understand what's at stake, handle it the right way, and take care of the kids that we're all responsible for. Good night.
See why we thought of him. Thank you very much for staying. We're running a little bit behind. We're hoping to start questions at 8, but